Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to this special episode of Inside the Firm. Today I have a very special guest. As you can see, we are sitting in the ARCAT booth here at the AIA 2022 convention. Brian Miller. Brian Miller is the Vice President of Marketing at ARCAT with over 30 years of experience within the commercial construction industry. Brian has consulted with over 200 building product manufacturers and dozens of the area's better-known AEC firms, giving him a unique insight into the marketplace, its complexities, and its opportunities. Brian, welcome to the show.
Great. It's great to be here. Love the opportunity.
Yeah, it's feelings mutual on this side. So you and I were shooting the breeze a little bit before we started here, and one thing I always like to understand about everybody is, before we get into ARCAT specifically, tell us how you got here. You know, what led you to Miami University and then ultimately a marketing career?
Well, Miami University is kind of a silly story. A movie called Animal House came out about the year before I went to Miami, and I applied to one school, went to a toga party my senior year in high school. A friend of mine's older brother held, and I thought, this is the place for me. Obviously, I had more academic interest than the party interest, but that was fun. It's a beautiful campus. It's the Yale of the West, historic university. All the buildings are Georgian. It's beautiful architecture, a very nice place. And after Miami, I ended up working for Xerox and went through. I never thought I'd be in sales. I was a marketing major, but ended up in sales. But as it turned out, it was great training. And that ended up getting me the job at Sweets back pre-internet, when Sweets was incredibly iconic. It was the go-to resource outside of product binders. That experience led me to meet Rick Janot, who would later found ARCAT. He left in 91. I left in 92 to start Constructive Marketing Services, a full-service building product and sales consulting business. I did that for 9 years, and in 2001, Rick convinced me to join him at ARCAT. At the time, the product selection process was moving to print to online, and I couldn't pass it up. And so for 15 years, we had a great time growing the business and eventually turning it into the largest platform of its kind in North America. I left for 5 years and kind of had some fun with some startups in the industry. 2 years ago, I came back, and back in October, I was promoted to VP of Marketing.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's a great story. So speaking of stories, I would love to hear more about, maybe you could give us, what is your best consultation story and your worst consultation story, and without naming names.
Actually, there's one that's kind of within the same company.
Okay.
And I hope they're all retired now and don't hear this. But there was a company in Cincinnati, and we ended up winning an award for the campaign we put together. But it was one of those situations where they had too many cooks in the kitchen. Everything we did on the creative side, we created a trade ad series for them for a new product that they were introducing. And everything that we submitted had to be approved by like 6 or 7 people within the company. Now, it didn't bother me that a lot of people were involved, because every project we took on, we gathered a lot of insight. I'm a firm believer in talking to the marketplace, the people who actually select the products, talking to the people who sell the products, people who develop the products. And in this case, had we not talked to an architectural firm in Cincinnati, Glacier Associates at the time, we may have taken the ad campaign in a different direction. But initially, and this is the kind of the funny part, when they had submitted their own brainstorming ideas, it was a product that was a hollow metal door that took on, had a special stain so you could like mimic the wood treatment in the room. It had an embossed finish so it looked like natural grain. And so from the company side of it, they wanted to go head-to-head against wood. When we interviewed the architects, they wanted something, they were more purist. And so if they wanted a wood door, why would they choose a metal door? Despite the metal door having advantages in terms of flexibility and door hardware, more security, longer lifespan perhaps. So we had to position the product properly. But ultimately, initially when we got the ideas from the client, one idea was like a dog lifting its leg to pee on the product.
Okay.
and I remember from some advertising 101 class, it's probably not a good idea to pee on your product in the ad. There was one shedding its skin. There was one with a beaver with a chipped tooth. That was interesting because about a year later, when a competitor introduced a similar product, they used that concept.
Okay.
But ultimately, the positioning was, where the function required a steel door, but the look was best with a wood look. That's where that product fit. And it was an incredibly successful campaign. There used to be a publication, Construction Marketing Today, that gave us an Abbey Award, kind of based on Aberdeen Publishing, like an Addy. It was my 15 minutes of fame. And so that was probably one of the highlights and the fun parts.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, I really miss the consulting days. But it was like a situation when you're a consultant, you might work with, 5 or 6 companies at a time, and you get active with projects, and then the projects are done, and you got to scramble and find new clients. And I love the creative process. I love engaging with advertising firms because that's kind of, I'm an artist on the weekends and stuff, and I love the creative side of it. But when I worked for ARCAT, instead of working with 5 or 6 companies on a regular basis, now I get to engage with over 600 manufacturers and some of the top marketing minds in this industry.
Oh, sure.
And I've been blessed over 30 years to kind of capture some of that information and share it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So as we were mentioning too before we started, is that there's a lot of people that listen to this show that are small business owners, a lot of them architects. What is one marketing mistake that you think that every business seems to make that you see?
One of my biggest pet peeves is when I see companies or individuals winging it.
Meaning they just kind of on their own, like they're not consulting anybody else, an expert?
Yeah.
Okay.
We had a quote on the wall back in my consulting days from Thomas Carlyle, a British historian and philosopher, and it was, "Nothing is more terrible than activity without insight." In the building product trade, it's really important to position the product properly. And when you talk to, say, companies' field reps, they know that you not only have to share what's good about the product and the benefits of the product, but you have to show its limitations. You have to show situations where perhaps it's not a good application. Because if you don't, and the architect is oversold, they may put it into a situation that could later create a black eye, for themselves or the company.
Sure.
And so architects have to have a much more full understanding, a complete understanding of a given product. And so if somebody's just winging it, and I've seen trade shows in the past, there was a fella, it was a CSI show, a specifier show, and there are all these older fellas with beards outside of his booth, and he was dancing and winging, and you could just see the frustration on their faces. But in my mind, when you talk to an architect, when you talk to a specifier especially, they are more than willing to share what you need to know to market effectively. Rick Bro, formerly of Centria, he retired some time ago, brilliant guy. He was one of the first people to tell me that architects prefer to be educated versus sold. So if you engage at that level and have that exchange, they're very forthcoming with input and insight. So I guess the mistakes people make is making presumptions.
Yeah.
The other thing I've seen, being on both sides of the table, is that manufacturers sometimes simply take the word of a salesperson and make decisions, sometimes costly decisions, not just in terms of that initial expense, but perhaps lost opportunities because they've kind of fallen victim to the wow of the presentation. I think it's always a good idea to do your research and ask, the specification community, for instance, how do they feel about gated content? How do they feel about perhaps their names being shared without their permission? Those kind of things.
Yeah. That's a really interesting insight into architects. I mean, as you know, I'm an architect, and obviously I would agree with the education part of it. We want to know, because we have to engage with the drawings and the details so much. I feel like we're kind of giving these manufacturers an opportunity of, like, all you got to do is teach us how it applies, and we'll get it into the drawings. I mean, ultimately, we just want to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. And so if you're enabling us to solve a problem, you're on the right track there. Was there a time period, do you think, when that changed, like 70s, 80s? Like, could you actually put, like, sort of a decade date on when that sort of transition happened? Or was it always...
Transition as far as what?
From just trying to ram a product down an architect's throat versus, hey, we'll come in, there's this lunch and learn. We'll come in, we'll do a lunch and learn for your team, and we'll buy lunch and we'll teach you about our products and how we can help you solve problems.
I see it more on the digital side. There is a great demand for leads, right? And so that's why I think you see more gated information, gated content on a manufacturer's website. To perhaps people that understand digital marketing and maybe not the complexities of the decision-making process, the fact that the architects are recommending products, they aren't the purchasers of the product may not be like bought and installed for months, maybe perhaps years later, by somebody completely different, right? When an architect comes to a research platform like ARCAT, they're looking to do productive research.
Right.
When they come to a manufacturer's own website, they may need access to those 3-part specifications to look at testing data, to compare apples to apples, to make informed decisions. I think typically architects are those prototypical education-oriented decision makers, because they're not winging it. There's risk involved. And so when that information is gated for the purpose of lead generation, they're actually losing several opportunities, because at least from the architects I've talked to, they'll go elsewhere for that content.
Sure. You a word really stuck out to me when you were speaking there, and that was digital marketing, or that phrase rather. Like, how does someone like you sift through all the options for digital marketing and decide these are the ones I'm going to do? Like, how do you solve that problem? Because I have that problem all the time of like, should we spend our money on Thumbtack? Should we go to Google AdWords? All of these things.
Yeah, it is. It's a much different world than 30 years ago, and even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
There was a time early in my career with suites that manufacturers had a binder budget. They'd send their binders out, and they would hope that those binders would be available on the shelves when an architect had a need for their type of product. And then they would have a suites budget to supplement that, because suites would send out 26,000 sets of books that looked like encyclopedias. With the internet, and so your ad budget was relatively limited compared to today. Today, people invest in specification software. They invest not so much in trade shows as I think they used to, although this show is incredible. I really love what John Crosby's done with the show with Perkins and Will and the unique layout and everything. But there's so many different alternatives that while there are more alternatives, say, to a company like ARCAT, those ad budgets have increased dramatically. So in terms of making choices between them, to me, if I were a manufacturer, I'd reach out to those people that I'm targeting and find what their sources of content are. Podcasts are incredibly unpopular now, right? We launched Detailed this year with Sharice Lakeside. And a friend of mine in Cincinnati told me that there are more podcast subscribers than there are subscribers to Netflix, which kind of blew me away.
It's crazy.
Right? Mm-hmm. And I was talking to somebody earlier at the booth today. I'm naturally curious. My wife and I watch nature documentaries. And every time I watch another nature documentary, I presume I've seen every silly bird dance there is. And yet there's another amazing creature, right? Some crazy bug, there's so much content out there. How do you possibly absorb it all? The best thing about podcasts is you can absorb it at your own time, at your own convenience.
Yeah, during almost any activity.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I think the podcasts have gotten so prolific, namely because you see us set up today, and like this isn't more than $1,000 worth of equipment, and then we're instantly be able to upload it to one RSS feed, and it's there. It's all over the place. It's amazing. So thank you guys for sponsoring the podcast, by the way. We really appreciate that help.
No, I love the show, and I think it's the place to be. Ultimately, it's all about information, right? And you have to inform the buyer, you have to inform the marketplace. One of the things that hasn't really changed since the print days is that architects need to access information as soon as they're, the decision to buy, the buying impulse starts long before the manufacturers are aware of it, because typically they don't find out about it until the bid stage. I know that's changing to some degree more recently. But sites like ARCAT and other research platforms are invaluable in terms of making that information immediately accessible. And so in terms of a digital plan, I think that's where I would start. Not just because I'm with ARCAT, but I think, who was it, the late Dean Horowitz, who with ComArc, he said it's one of the top 3, it might have even been your show, I can't remember, top 3 considerations for building product manufacturers to make sure your information's available on an online catalog so that it's there when somebody needs it. We've always called that the point of need.
Right, 100%. Yeah. Let's move on to the economy. It's in the headlines. You can't. Obviously, the economy brings us here. What's your opinion on where you think it's headed over the next year to 2 years? You think we're looking at a hard recession, a depression?
This one is so hard to predict.
It's weird.
Yeah, I mean we're fighting inflation, but it's based upon a number of things that we hadn't faced before, right? It's a different kind of inflation than we had, say, during the Carter years. And so perhaps the traditional means of fighting it hurt the situation as much as they help it. Things have to be done to slow things down, to make adjustments, but there's still supply issues, there's still labor issues. I know it's affected our industry quite a bit. There are products that have been specified that don't make it on the job site because of supply situations, and alternatives have to be used and approved and that sort of thing. My hope, and I tend to be optimistic, is that this is kind of a short recession and we come bouncing out of it because of the unusual circumstance that brought us to this point.
Right.
I think eventually, the supply issues will hopefully take care of themselves, and the labor issues will, work themselves out as well. I have a son who's been wanting to buy a house, and with each passing month, as the rates go up and the prices go up. So it might, I'm pretty positive. I don't think it's going to be like a doomsday scenario, but I think it's going to slow down for a bit.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing with the housing industry is that, the lending practices are much more stringent now. The fundamentals are there. I don't, it's really unfair, I think, to think that we're going to compare it to 2008. It's like you said, it's a very unique set of circumstances that we're kind of heading up against here for this next one that seems to be coming, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Yeah. So knowing that, do you have what do you think AEC firms should do to prepare? What would be your recommendation for almost any business? How do you prepare for something like this? If it seems inevitable, even if it's very soft, what is your best strategies?
Well, I've never run an architectural firm, so I can't say it from a financial or a management perspective. All I know is building product marketing. In 2008, when that happened, ARCAT had one of its best years. I personally had one of my best years because it's a very cost-effective means of reaching the architectural community. So many companies will play hide and seek when things get bad, and it just makes it worse, right? Because what we do is provide project activity over a long period of time, and so you can't just necessarily disappear. Budgets are cut. Sometimes there's layoffs. Things have to be tightened up a little bit. Perhaps some of the things that are more on the outer realm of what one does in terms of advertising may get trimmed a little bit. But the core activities, the things that are more closely related to the sale itself, like generating project activity, those things I think are core and you have to keep.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes I hear people make all the time is that they think the first thing they should cut is marketing. It's like, how do you even get to the lifeblood of getting work if you don't market yourself and put yourself out there?
One of my favorite, you talk to, I'm not judging anyone, right? This is just their mentality. But I've heard this statement, come back later when our sales are better. And I'm like, well,
how do you get to
that's
the
what we
sales?
do, if your production breaks down, you find the money to fix it because you need to get the product out the door. You can't just it creates kind of its own downward spiral. Where
it's
sales
like a snake
are down.
eating its own tail, sort of.
Exactly. Yeah.
100%. Well, I'm trying to be as optimistic as you are too. I hope it's just kind of a little soft bounce and we out of it. Like you said, the fundamentals are, we both kind of agreed, like your son, he wants to buy a house. Well, then that's demand, and the first thing we need is demand in order to make this all happen. Let's move on to ARCAT. So
sure.
For those still listening who still don't know what ARCAT does, give us your pitch to visit ARCAT today.
ARCAT is the original and most comprehensive building product research platform in North America. We take content from manufacturers' websites, and we don't necessarily reproduce it. We create an index of that content on ARCAT. So every product that you find within ARCAT, within a manufacturer's profile is what we refer to it, is electronically linked to that content deep within the manufacturer's site. Sites like Google, everybody uses Google. Yeah. You use Google, I use Google. Google is really effective if you know the brand that you're searching for. A site like ARCAT is more for architects who perhaps haven't made up their mind on which brand to choose, because it's really easy to look up a product, find the manufacturers who make that product. We'll even go to the point, like if you're looking for VOC paint, it'll show not only the manufacturers that make the paint, but it'll pull VOC paint up to the top of the product listings. If you want to go to the manufacturer's site, you click on the VOC paint and you're right there. And then once that selection has been made, we have tools like Spec Wizard that take a proprietary guide spec and allow one to edit that spec down to whatever that project application is through drop-down menus and mutually exclusive options. Spec Wizard's been around for 18 years, and it's amazing. And I think part of it's probably because of the emerging architects that perhaps weren't trained well in writing specifications in college. I know Holly Jordan's actively looking at curriculums for the architectural schools to kind of help solve that problem. But younger emerging architects have kind of turned to tech to drive or to solve issues.
Yeah.
My kids on the weekends work for DoorDash. Everything's an app. We never called Spec Wizard an app, but it's kind of an app for spec writing. And then what we find with Spec Wizard as well is the inside salespeople, the technology directors, those people that assist the field reps, they love it as a productivity tool. And then the field reps themselves, who may have all the training in the world on how to properly configure, a metal roofing system and ask the right questions to do the job, they're not trained in writing specs. I was going to take my CDT several years ago, and I remember April 22nd was my test date because I chickened out. I got all the study guides. It was like 200 pages of study. People take courses to do it, and I knew I wasn't prepared. It's a lot to ask all your field reps to be CDT. I recommend it highly because it's a badge of credibility, and it shows you know your stuff. But a tool like Spec Wizard can be used to kind of facilitate that spec writing function. GAF is here. I think GAF has been probably a client for maybe 30 years. They were one of the first to adapt to Spec Wizard. They private labeled it. They called it their own. But initially at that time, and I don't know if the people here that I think you're talking to today go back that far, but they had a 1-week time frame to get back to an architect with a specification.
Wow. And
with Spec Wizard, they could turn it around in 20 minutes.
Right, yeah.
So that's what we do. I mean, we're a place to find information, and then once you've found it, it's easy to compare. And then the content that we have on the site is written by spec writers who are fellows with CSI. The information's top notch. It's manufacturers' proprietary guide specs, but it's not overtly proprietary, and so you could still use them. And so as a starting point for, say, a basis of design spec, it has all those advantages to the manufacturer built in that were, the reason that the architect chose the product in the first place, built into that spec.
Yeah, and the best part is no registration.
No registration.
That's I try to pitch that every time. They're not trying to get our information. You're just trying to give the information, and that's one of the best things I love about ARCAT. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a big deal, and that's why I recommend people talk to folks like you to see that. When I went to Skip last year, one of the new things that we're doing with my role as VP of Marketing is I address conferences. I've talked to the Skip conference, specification consultants in independent practice, 2 years now, and Holly Jordan from Perkins & Will was handing out these no registration buttons. And I asked her about it, and she went on and on. And then you talk to somebody else, and because it's a blocked information. And beyond that, if one registers for the information, they can be assured that they're going to start getting emails, they're going to start getting unsolicited phone calls. And so it becomes not necessarily a productive tool. If every time I use Google, right, it's interesting. I mean, this is Big Brother. This is modern age of electronic information. I posted a picture of an easel I paint on Saturdays, and I bought this $1,500 easel, Italian easel, beautiful easel. I didn't pay that much. It was like through World Points. Posted a picture on Facebook, and right afterwards, I start getting ads for easels.
Even if you just talk about it.
Yeah, and I'm like, you're too late.
You're behind the ball.
but now with this registration and these gates, there's a desire to capture the leads because you think it's helpful, right? You want to give your sales rep activity, you want to control the process, but to the point that you're deflecting opportunity and deflecting potential project opportunity, you're kind of hurting yourself.
Yeah, 100%. We're coming up on the half hour, Brian. This has been a great conversation. And knowing one question I like to ask every guest is knowing what you know now, and if you could go back in time when you first started your marketing career, what is one piece of advice you'd give your former self?
Well, that's a good one. Now that we're running out of time.
Yeah.
No, I've always been curious, and I can't say that it's advice I'd give my former self, because I've never been guilty of this.
Yeah.
But I think the best marketers are naturally curious. They want to learn, they want to engage, they want to embrace new things, and they're naturally empaths. You have to put yourself in the seat of the buyer. My perspective with marketing, it's the science of making buying products easier, either from the buying experience or from how you match things up in terms of the selling process. As a young marketer, I think I had that instinctively. In school, I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to be the next James Taylor. I wanted to play basketball. There were a number of things I would have loved to have done. I wanted to be in advertising. I wanted to be an artist. This career has kind of allowed me, well, not to be a basketball player other than the intramurals, to engage at a high level with some really smart and savvy people and absorb a lot. And so that I've been blessed in that regard. Yeah,
fantastic. If people want to learn more about you and ARCAT, where can they find and follow ARCAT?
Well, ARCAT is short for the Architect's Catalog. It's arcat.com. My email is brian, BRIAN, @arcat.com. We welcome any insight that we can gather. ARCAT is back to its innovation roots. We've done a number of new things just in the last 6 months alone. We're looking at some other things. It's interesting because on the way here, I passed 4 architects, and all of them came up and said, "What's new at ARCAT?"
Cool.
Right? So that's what we're looking for. So do reach out. We'd love to hear your opinions on site registration, and certainly what we can do better.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate your time today, Brian.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.